First, let's start with this case. My husband and I had just finished watching a movie in the city we were visiting and decided to grab dinner. We didn't have a reservation, so we approached the hostess at a nearby restaurant to ask if she could accommodate us. Initially, she didn't think it was possible, but then mentioned, "I do have this table, but you'll need to finish within 45 minutes." That seemed reasonable, so we agreed and were seated. Later, when the waitress came by and asked if we'd like to see the dessert menu, I mentioned that the hostess had informed us we needed to vacate the table in 15 minutes. To my surprise, my husband became visibly upset and raised his voice at me. "It's not your job to tell her that. That's the hostess' responsibility," he exclaimed. He went on to say, "It's not something you should worry about." I was shocked and taken aback. My intention was not to cause any trouble, but simply to avoid being rushed if I decided to order dessert. I thought it would be helpful for the waitress to check with the hostess to see if we could get a bit more time. After all, the waitress might not have been aware of the hostess's earlier comment about needing us to leave by a specific time. The restaurant tables were placed closely together, and there was a solo diner sitting just 3 feet away from us. I felt humiliated being reprimanded so loudly, especially within earshot of someone else, for what I believed was a minor and reasonable comment. A few days later, I brought up the incident again, hoping to talk it through. My husband remained firm in his opinion, insisting I had been wrong to inform the waitress about the hostess's statement. He then suggested I seek opinions from others to get their perspective on the situation. So here I am, asking, was I in the wrong for mentioning what the hostess told us? Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong, but your husband sure is. He completely embarrassed you and that waitress. The fact that he's had time to think about his behavior, and he still refuses to apologize, even knowing how it made you feel, is majorly concerning to say the least. Jesus, what's his problem? All you did was gently remind the waitress that you had to be out the table in 15 minutes for another reservation. And that's if we're going off the assumption that the hostess even told the waitress about the situation in the first place. It was a busy night. I guarantee the last thing on her mind was the reservation time for guests who haven't even arrived yet. Her priority was serving her guests whom were already seated at her table. She asked if you wanted dessert, not for you to leave the table before you've finished eating. I've always said you could tell a lot about a person from how they treat service workers, and your husband's reaction says, a lot. Does he usually have such a short fuse? Is his temper usually directed towards you, or a stranger who is just trying to do their job to the best of their ability? This would be the last time I went out with him for a while. I seriously think your husband would benefit from some anger management courses. That's not how an adult conduct themselves in public, especially in response to such a non-issue. I hate to see how he reacts when somebody really pisses him off behind closed doors. He sounds like the kind of guy that yells and insults his employees in the back, not realizing his customers can hear him in the front. Or worse, he just doesn't care. You're not in the wrong. I was a waiter. We try our best to be as professional as possible. However, things does slip between the cracks. We forget that someone said they didn't like bread with poppy seeds. We forget that someone asked to bring the steaks 10 min after the salad and not after they finished the salad. And we sometimes forget when the hostess squeezes a customer on a table that will be occupied in 45 minutes. Being reminded of such things once, I dare say once, because annoying customers may remind you something every 5 min when you attend other tables, for example, is totally okay and even appreciated, because it leads to less mistakes on very busy nights, exactly like you described here. I'm saying that from my personal experience, and cannot speak for the entire waiters' workforce, though. So you're just trying to communicate effectively, and you got chastised for that like a child in front of other people? I'd be blind with fury if I were you. Tight-lipped, walked straight out of the restaurant, not spoken a word to my partner until I got an apology. A big one. Crazy that he's doubling down. I'm sure he realized in hindsight that he just overreacted to nothing and doesn't want to admit it. Barf. I'm shocked that you haven't ripped him a new one, and that you're even asking us if you're in the wrong. Hope this isn't how he usually acts. Next up, my girlfriend Fiona, who is 19 years old, and I, a 21-year-old, have been dating for about a month. Yesterday, I brought her to a Christmas party with my group of friends so she could meet them. Fiona got along with everyone fairly well, though she was understandably a bit shy. It was also a challenge for her since most of my friends and I are international students, whereas she was born and raised in North America. For some context, Fiona is the kind of person who avoids conflict and tends to let things slide to maintain peace. However, if she feels provoked, she's not afraid to stand up for herself and can be a little fiery. That said, she's incredibly sweet and understanding, which made what happened at the party all the more surprising. During the party, Fiona was mostly quiet, occasionally chiming in on conversations while allowing them to flow around her. She was holding a bag that, as I learned today, is worth around $2,700. My friend Celia noticed the bag and asked Fiona where she got it. Fiona explained that it was a gift from her parents. Celia then asked what Fiona's parents did for a living. Fiona replied that her mother is a stay-at-home mom, and her father works in the oil industry. At this, Celia frowned and remarked, "You know digging for oil is terrible for the environment." In response, Fiona asked Celia, in a calm yet pointed tone, whether the clothes she was wearing were made of polyester or nylon, whether she participated in fast fashion, whether she traveled by plane, and if she primarily relied on solar-powered energy. Fiona then asked Celia if her commitment to being environmentally conscious ended when it involved someone working hard to support their family. While Fiona's tone remained light, it was clear she was upset. My other friends laughed and agreed Fiona had a good point, and the conversation moved on. However, Celia went quiet and left the party shortly after. This morning, Celia sent me a text saying Fiona had been extremely rude to her, that she didn't feel comfortable attending events where Fiona was present, and that she thought I deserved someone better and less snobby. When I shared this with Fiona, she became quiet before explaining that she had snapped at Celia because Celia had been purposely ignoring her and making passive-aggressive comments throughout the evening. Fiona also mentioned that I might not have noticed because, as she put it, girls communicate through subtext. I argued that aside from the comment about the oil industry, Celia hadn't said anything overtly rude and suggested Fiona apologize to maintain the peace. Fiona, however, refused, saying she wouldn't apologize for defending herself. Now both Fiona and Celia are upset, and I feel responsible for putting them in this situation. Am I wrong for not immediately siding with Fiona? Update: Fiona and I have talked, and I've apologized to her for not standing up for her right away. I also showed her the feedback I received on this situation, and she spent 2 hours reading and laughing. Thankfully, we are still very much together. I sent a firm text to Celia, pointing out that her behavior toward Fiona was rude, and that her comment about Fiona being snobby was uncalled for. As it turns out, Celia tried to badmouth Fiona to some of our mutual friends, but they didn't agree with her and even told her she was mistaken. From what I've gathered, Celia wasn't romantically interested in me, as some people suggested. Instead, it seems she was jealous of Fiona. For additional context, Fiona said it didn't bother her that Celia asked about her parents or the bag, since those are common questions she gets. What upset her was the dismissive and condescending attitude Celia displayed. This experience has been humbling for me, and I'll definitely rethink how I behave in relation to my girlfriend in the future. Thanks for the advice and perspective. Let's start judging. You're in the wrong. Honestly, great comeback your GF had to the oil rig comment, and even your friends thought your GF had a point. Also, Celia made such a backhanded comment to your GF, and your GF just gave the heat back. You should have taken your GF side, and honestly, Celia is trying to just manipulate you into picking her or your GF. Not sure if she likes you or not, but definitely sus IMO. Just weigh who you value more and realize you're jeopardizing your relationship with your GF by not taking her side because she's valid in this scenario. You're in the wrong. Does nobody know what social graces are anymore? Your friend picked a fight the moment she inquired about your girlfriend's purse. To me, she was obviously jealous. When she found out how much she purse cost and was told it was a gift, she asked what your girlfriend's parents do for a living. This might not seem rude at first, but it's the equivalent of asking someone what they make at their job. It might not seem rude to some people, but generally, it's not something others should be asking because one person's wage is nobody else's business. Your friend was digging for information about your girlfriend's family and immediately decided to be rude by insinuating that your girlfriend's bag was bought with money that came from ruining the environment. This was, again, probably fueled by jealousy. She was jealous that your girlfriend's family was able to gift her such an expensive, luxurious gift and decided to shame her for it instead of being nice and simply leaving a compliment. Your friend could have said anything. Well, it's beautiful, and they have good taste. I'm happy that your father could get that for you on a single income. It must have been hard. He sounds like a hard worker. Instead, she decided to be rude, and yet you're mad at your girlfriend for defending herself and her family? I think you should reflect on the relationship you have with your friend, and your girlfriend should reflect on what relationship she has with you. Especially since your girlfriend is shy, and you shame her for standing up for herself when someone is rude to her. You and your friend are so ignorant, it's laughable. You should apologize immediately. It's the least you could do. You're in the wrong. Purely based on what you have written, and it's entirely possible that there is more to this, as your girlfriend has said, because I agree that a lot of men do not pick up on the subtleties of women-on-women aggression. Your friend took the first shot. She in no way, shape, or form had to make a comment about your girlfriend's father's job. Regardless of anyone's opinions on the oil industry, the comment literally has no value other than to be rude. Your girlfriend didn't pick her father's job. The oil industry is not going to suddenly change if she tells her father to quit, and making her feel bad about what her father does helps no one and nothing. The fact that you are quicker to defend your friend and are not supporting your girlfriend? Yeah, can't imagine she will be your girlfriend much longer. Next up, my fiancé and I love attending live classical music concerts as a special date night. Yesterday, I spent $110 on 2 front-row seats for a holiday performance we had been excited about for weeks. Not even 15 seconds into the music, the woman sitting directly behind me started loudly humming along. At first, I tried to ignore it, hoping she would stop, but she didn't. Her humming wasn't subtle. It was loud enough to be distracting. On top of that, she was overly touchy with her husband and clearly intoxicated. At one point, her husband tried to tell her to stop, saying something along the lines of it being impolite, but she just laughed it off. Meanwhile, I was growing increasingly frustrated. I'm not someone who enjoys confrontation. I actually hate it. But I couldn't concentrate on the music, and my irritation kept building. My fiancé didn't seem to notice the humming at first, so I hesitated to say anything, not wanting to ruin her experience. About 30 minutes into the concert, I told my fiancé I felt like I needed to speak up because I couldn't hear the music properly and was too frustrated to stay silent. She reassured me not to worry about it and to avoid making a scene. I tried, but 5 minutes later, the woman escalated by starting to sing along. If you're not familiar with classical music etiquette, it's expected that audience members remain completely quiet. No singing, humming, or even tapping your feet. That was my breaking point. I turned around, looked directly at the woman, and said, "Ma'am, please stop." She looked confused and asked me to repeat myself. I calmly said, "Ma'am, please stop. I've been listening to you the entire concert." She waved me off dismissively, clearly embarrassed, while her husband avoided making eye contact, looking mortified. I could hear a few other audience members laughing quietly and whispering to each other about what had happened. Unfortunately, even after that, she didn't stop. A few minutes later, she tapped me on the shoulder to apologize, but I was too upset to respond and simply waved her away. I didn't want to engage further. I was frustrated and disappointed, especially since I had paid for a front-row experience, but spent most of the concert distracted by her behavior. When my fiancé became more aware of the humming, she also started feeling frustrated. While she hadn't noticed it as much earlier, she was sitting at a slight angle farther away, which might explain why it didn't bother her initially. Once it did, she politely asked the woman to be quiet as well, but the humming continued unabated. By the time the concert ended, I was completely drained. I didn't want to acknowledge the woman or her husband. I just wanted to leave. What should have been an enjoyable evening turned into a frustrating lesson in patience. If it weren't for my fiancé managing to enjoy some of the performance, I might have even considered asking for a refund or involving staff to address the issue. So, was I wrong for telling her to stop? Should I have escalated the situation to the staff or handled it differently? I'm genuinely not a confrontational person, and being in this kind of situation was extremely uncomfortable for me. I'd appreciate your perspective. Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. We've all been there. Some annoying nonsense when you've paid good money for tickets. Then on top of it, the concern that if you bring it up to others, that it might ruin the experience for them. Maddening. Gently, fiancé was wrong. You weren't making a scene. Misha Brugger-Gossman was. Shout out to our Canuck cantante. You did nothing wrong by addressing the woman's outrageous behavior directly. Next time, you might decide to ask an usher to deal with her. You're not in the wrong. She shouldn't have shown up drunk. You had every right to ask her to stop. No one wants to hear a drunk person at a classical concert. I'm amazed an usher didn't kick her out when she started singing. Next time, get an usher and do try and get a refund. You didn't get to hear the concert. You didn't get what you'd paid for. She probably ruined other people's nights too. You're not in the wrong, and you're absolutely correct about classical music etiquette. For what it's worth, I also can't stand this behavior at rock concerts. I know the vibe is very different, but I resent paying money to hear the show when half the audience is singing along with the vocals. Usually not very well either. Next up, my brother and I share a room. We're both guys, 23 and 21 years old. His girlfriend comes over every weekend and usually stays for 2 nights. When she visits, my brother asks me to sleep downstairs in the sitting room or in my sister's room if it's available. I've been accommodating this arrangement for several months, but I'm really starting to get fed up, and I've told him I don't want to do it anymore. I pay rent just like he does, and I feel I shouldn't have to give up my bed every weekend. I need proper sleep to function, and being constantly displaced affects my mood and energy. My brother argues that he needs the room because his girlfriend has insomnia and finds it hard to sleep downstairs. She also tends to sleep in until 1 or 2 p.m. most days, which means I can't use the room during that time. If I need my clothes or other belongings, I have to ask my brother to grab them for me, which is inconvenient and frustrating. One of my brother's main arguments is that when I left for a year, he had the room to himself. During that time, he started dating his girlfriend, and she would regularly stay over. When I moved back in, he agreed to share the room again, but only on the condition that I would give it up when she visited. He seems to think this is a fair compromise because he was used to having the space for himself. My counter-argument is that I would have been entitled to share the room anyway, whether he liked it or not, since our mother would have made him accommodate me. Just because I was gone for a year doesn't mean he has permanent dibs on the room, especially since we both pay equal rent. I don't think it's fair to give up my space every weekend, but I also want to make sure I'm not being unreasonable or stubborn about this. What do you think? Am I justified in standing my ground, or am I being difficult? I'd really appreciate hearing other perspectives. Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. The room is just as much yours as it is his, and he doesn't get to tell you every weekend to sleep somewhere else so he can have privacy. If he wants privacy with her, they need to find somewhere else to be. Also, there is an unwritten rule somewhere that people sharing a room with another person should not have overnight guests in said room. With your ages, it would be healthiest to find your way towards separate rooms however possible. You're not in the wrong. If you pay rent, then you should do interleaving weekends in the room. Your good night's sleep is not less important than his GF's sleep. Sorry. What a rude decision, and what a rude explanation to why you should be the one sleeping downstairs. You're not in the wrong. Your brother is so greedy. The fact that they've been doing that for over a year, what else does he want? He could sleep at his GFS too. You're not obligated to tolerate him bringing her over all the time. It's crazy how he wants everything to himself. Also, I'm curious on why the GF doesn't feel bad that you have to leave your room for 2 nights and discomforting you. Also, the fact that she sleeps till late. Is she expecting you to just wait for her to wake up and not go to your own room since then? They both need to be humbled.